Okay, everybody, this is my spoiler review of True Detective Season 4, Night Country. This is Episode 2. I'm going to break my review down into three parts. We're going to talk about everything going on with Danvers first, then Navarro, and we'll finish off where Danvers and Navarro's storylines meet. Now, maybe my favorite thing coming out of this episode is the use of the word corpsicle, and we'll really delve into the corpsicle in this episode. It opens up the episode with the corpsicle. What I loved about what they did with the corpsicle is that we saw it thaw as the episode went on, revealing more and more. This was a very cool concept used to reveal things throughout the episode. I actually loved it. We'll see that the spiral tattoo was actually on Lund's forehead, and this spiral symbol is used in season 1, and this symbol has been alluded to in True Detective before in season 3, and it has a big part in this episode. Now, Peter and Danvers know the smartest thing is for this case to actually go to Anchorage because they have more resources. It's a big case. But what you love about a character like Liz is she's like, F Anchorage, we're keeping the case. And Liz has to literally yell at these cops. I mean, there's a point where some of these cops are taking selfies with these corpses, which is just crazy. Now, Navarro's the one who'll actually find that their clothes are folded across the way and their slippers there. And this is where Rose will warn Navarro to give this case to someone else to leave it. And she's like, well, it's tied to Annie. And then she says, well, then you're screwed. So that's interesting too. There's obviously foreshadowing hints at how much darkness is going to be surrounding this case and how it's going to affect a character like Navarro and a character like Danvers. And that's what True Detective, when it's at its best, does, is having the case affect the characters in many different emotional ways, some for better and some for worse. And this show has clearly showed in this season it's doing that well. Now, where the horror begins is when someone rips off the arm of Lund and he starts screaming. So he is still alive. And keep that in mind when they're counting heads, they're counting feet in this episode, the corpsicle, and that Lund is somewhere else. His leg is being amputated and he's in a deep coma, so of course they cannot talk to him yet. So we'll see if they eventually do talk to him. I'm sure that will probably be something that we'll see maybe second to last or finale episode. I also like the touch here at the end of the opening credits. I love how they tie it with Billie Eilish's music where it's blinking on something. There's always like a scene they throw in at the end that's not attached to the opening credits but is the tag at the end, and they show that here where they actually show the trailer that's revealed at the end of the episode right at the beginning here if you catch it, which was kind of cool. Now we'll meet for the first time this geology teacher, Reis. This is who Danvers goes to talk to. She wants him to explain what they were really doing at the research center. We also learn that she's had sexual relations with Bryce, but he explains in the research center no one came in, no one came out. They were madmen, they were very to themselves, and that their mission was to find this microorganism that could stop cellular decay, cure cancer, diseases, and even genetic disorders. But he's like, look, the fact is there was permafrost they're dealing with to make this really something that's too hard to even pull off and keep all that organism in its right state it needs to be. So he was in doubt that this could be something that ever would be achieved. Now, will also be another character that we learned Danvers is sleeping with and has slept with is Christopher Eccleston's character, who is the priest from The Leftovers, another great HBO show. So it was great to see him again. I feel like I haven't seen him in forever. And he's playing Captain Connelly. Now, Danvers stops them from taking the case because you see clearly Hank, who is very sketchy and is just mean in many scenes, like him saying that Danvers' specialty is not doing anything. But she stops both of them from taking to Anchorage by pointing out that the bodies have to thaw properly. And you see that Connelly's like, okay, but where are you going to put them? You don't have the resources here. And she cleverly thinks of the ice rink, and I like that they cut to the ice rink at this moment. There's moments you really feel bad for Leah here. You see she's coming off the ice rink excited, playing hockey, and she's like, did you see me play to Danvers? And Danvers just says no. But what Danvers didn't miss was that same girl from the video that is winking at her. So you love those little moments that only a Jodie Foster pulls off perfectly with her facial reaction. I also love that this Christmas tree effect in the middle of an ice rink. I've never seen that before, so for me, I thought that was just really cool. It has nothing to do with the episode, but I thought that was really sick. Now we meet this character of Kate who was brought up in the previous episode when Danvers was explaining to Peter about Navarro being on Annie's case, that Navarro was on this person, Kate, and she's someone you don't want to mess with. She is part of this regime here that runs the mines, part of the mine area, and she owns this rink with the mine people. We also learn that the reason she's going, oh God, when she sees Danvers and hates Danvers is she was sleeping with her husband at the time, Captain Connelly. And that's why she says, just to be clear, I'm letting you use the ice rink for the town. See, they do a good job at slowly revealing things, like I said with the corpsicle, but that they're making you think all the bodies are there, that they're in there, and that by the end of the episode, you get the big reveal that there's one missing, which we're going to obviously get to. But important details, they're all hurdled together. It looks like they're running away from someone. And more is connecting to the Annie case, that Navarro shows up and shows Danvers that that same spiral symbol was a tattoo on Annie. And you'll see that Danvers is like, so what? And Navarro's like, it's the same case. We can work together and figure out Annie. And she's rejected here, so it's a good payoff by the end of the episode that Danvers isn't going to have to look away from this anymore, and that it is totally connected to the Annie case, and they're going to have to work together. There's so much mystery alluded to Navarro and Danvers' history together, and Peter's trying to nudge at that like the audience wants to hear. And there's an interesting line Navarro says to Danvers' hero. She's like, the only one who can stand you is Prior, talking about Peter, but you will be breaking his heart real soon. So obviously there's so much personal feelings between Danvers and Navarro, going both ways too, that it seems like the more you learn about this, they've both wronged each other. That we know more about how Danvers wronged Navarro, but there is something there alluded to here that Navarro did to Danvers that she feels guilty about, and that later on in the episode, Danvers is like, no, we're not going there. We're just going to work together, solve this case, and that's it. So you're hoping by the end of this episode that they do also end up liking each other. That's going to be almost a bigger challenge than solving the case. Now, Peter has this brilliant idea to unlock Melina's phone using his face in the corpsicle. And this is going to be big. Later in the episode, they will look at the videos on his phone and see what we saw in the opening scene of the show, where Clark is saying she's awake and he's acting all crazy. Now, they also find, through the DNA testing, a handprint that was on one of the shoes of the corpsicle, but there's no match. And I love this scene when they're looking at all the files here together in the pictures with Danvers and Peter, because this highlights how powerful of an actress Jodie Foster is. And this philosophy of asking the right questions, like, that is her motto. And it shows her skills as a detective and that Peter is learning from her. And I also like when they're doing this, they're showing you that a lot of this can still be explained scientifically and not just jumping to supernatural things. Where I think a lot of people are really hard on this show already is they're jumping that this is all this crazy supernatural show. I do not think it's the case with this. I think obviously there's hints of that and pieces of that, but that was also like season 1. So I don't know why it's getting a lot of criticism from fans in that regard. Very strange to me. Now, I like the line Peter's saying, how scared do you have to be to run out on the ice without any shoes? And they're trying to figure out why the killer, because they're connecting there's a killer here because there's these folded clothes, but why he did this. And she says it makes sense, but we're not asking the right questions in that regard. So they do a really good job with these detective scenes and doing the detective work with Danvers and Peter. And I like we also get the payoff with the asking the right questions. That lesson that Navarro also learned from Danvers will pay off later with how Navarro solves something later on with the trailer. Now, what's interesting to note is when Danvers is interviewing the indigenous cleaners that worked on the research center, they say things like the researchers never spoke to us. We were just the cleaning ladies. So it's important in how they treat these indigenous women. And one of the cleaners says they took the work very seriously to the point where Lund screamed at me when I touched his notebook. Now, that could be looked at that way, but it also could be that Lund was up to something that was against these indigenous people that he did not want her to see. Now, also the delivery guy that we saw discover the tongue and this crime scene and what happened to these men in the first episode is talking to Peter. And he explains he's seen Clark naked at this place, that he was talking to himself, staring into space, and he saw him naked is important because that's where he saw the spiral tattoo on Clark. And the cleaning woman also says that the other men ignored him while he was locked off on his room, not paying attention to this guy losing his mind. But that makes sense. Like I had predicted last episode, that possibly the reason him being by himself was they didn't want anything to do with him because he was going nuts. But he also brings up to Peter he saw someone there. Remember that figure that ran past him? He's like, this is Ennis. You see people sometimes. So this could clearly be Clark, or it could be something supernatural. It's not clear. And I like this line. He's like, it's a long night. Even the dead get bored. And it's connecting to the theme with Rose, where Rose is a believer too that Ennis people see things. People see the dead, like she sees Travis, like we see Peter's son has this drawing of a woman they say is alluding to the grandma's folklore, but I still think that picture was him seeing a vision of Annie. Now, other things to note. Hank is texting his fiancée, Alina, And at one point, she's asking for money because she has a sick mother and she needs it for the medication. So you start realizing this is some kind of like sugar daddy situation going on. And she asks for pics of him, but we're not seeing pics back of her. So we don't even know if this is really even a woman, who this person is, if he's ever seen a picture of her. But this will lead him to finding the files his son stole. And this will lead to the worst scene we've seen of how Hank can be as a person, which we're going to get to. But there's other little things you got to pay attention to that are going to be very important, because they don't just throw lines in there for no reason, because they've brought up twice now in this show who is backing and funding the research center. And he's learned more about it, Peter, and is telling Danvers. He's talking about how it's this company, Tutley United, who makes glass, they handle video games, they do many things. And Danvers talks it down like it's not important, but you know she thinks it is important. These are all clues to what is going on. It always goes back to where the money's coming from with kind of cases like this. And you'll see Peter has a line to Danvers here like, what did Navarro do to you? And he's like, oh, you're worried you're going to F up too. So she did do something that hurt Danvers, that Danvers sees as an F up, and that Navarro does have guilt for because of the way she talks to Danvers about it at the end of the episode, and Danvers shuts it down. Danvers doesn't want to face her feelings and these moments in her life, and she has the same behavior with the drunk incident that happened with her husband and her stepchildren. What's also interesting is when Danvers goes to Peter's place, the grandma is there putting the marker version of the tattoo that was on Annie's chin, and that is part of their heritage, that she has herself on her chin. And you see how quickly Danvers snaps at seeing the sight of this. And it reminds me too how Peter did not like seeing his son even told about the folklore and the heritage that the grandma had. So it's showing you that behavior the town has towards a lot of the past indigenous culture. Now, Kayla, Peter's wife, does not like Danvers, kicks her out, and she even says she's 17, Leah, and wants to understand her heritage. And now you see Leah in the mirror is embracing it and is starting to learn more about stuff that Danvers probably never bothered and ever wanted to learn about. And I just thought too, when Leah saw the girl she likes, and the girl she likes loves that on her chin, it's like, okay, so she's definitely gonna get this tattooed on her chin, and this isn't going anywhere. I also love twice in this episode that you use Agnes Obel, because she's an amazing artist that was introduced to me through Dark. So shout out Dark for really putting her on the scene, and she really has just got music that works so well with shows like this. But she's an incredible artist. I highly suggest downloading all her work, because it's really some of the best music you'll ever hear. Now, what's interesting is while Danvers is trying to put up the Christmas tree after Leah has snuck out, she finds in the boxes this polar bear doll again that was at her bedside. Now we see in the flashback she was playing with this polar bear, which I believe is her stepson Holden. I think her husband, who clearly died in this incident with the son, with the drunk driving, I think those are Leah and Holden are stepkids, because of how Leah said, you didn't have to take me on, you know, my dad would have understood. But Twist and Shout was playing in this scene, so I said that was going to be so important in the last episode to Danvers' trauma. And now we know that that was like their song together, her and Holden, and that's why she can't hear it, because of what happened to him. And it's important, the polar bear, because the polar bear appeared to Navarro. So is that spirit animal of the polar bear with the eye missing, is that Holden? And it's interesting the Twist and Shout song was playing at the research center, because you can have a wild theory with something like that, or symbolically of like, is this a purgatory? They keep saying this is the end of the world, Ennis, and that maybe Danvers died in the car accident. And it's just strange that all these things that were deep in her life and affected her in the music just happened to be in that song playing at the research center. Can lend to crazy kind of theories like that. It's pretty cool. And also, the whiteboard they found in the research center said, "We are all dead," and you know that was written by Clark. And he was the one who said she's awake. Holden said she's awake. When they say she's awake, I think they're referring to Annie here getting some kind of revenge, if we're going the supernatural route, on the town and men that have wronged her. Now, when I was talking about that scene where Hank is just really looking worse and worse as the show goes on, he goes to Peter and hits him. And he says, even your mother didn't steal from us when she left. And he says, Danvers doesn't own you. You have a family and she is not in it. Blood is blood, Peter. So this is the manipulation, the guilt he's putting on his own son. This is going to be a crossroads for the character of Peter, because they are definitely setting up, he's going to have a decision to make where he's going to side with Danvers on something big, where Hank's going to be trying to stop Danvers and be like, it's me or her. And I think that's where Peter's going to have that big growth choice to stay with somebody who's like a motherly figure to him in Danvers because his mother had left him. Now, I love this line when Danvers goes to have some fun with Connelly and says, I knew you didn't stay in town for the lovely weather. That was great. And they bang. And now it makes sense when they're banging. You connect the dots at why last episode Navarro grabbed the pictures of the police department that she teases Danvers about Connelly, so she knows they've slept together. Now we learn they've been doing it on and off for 19 years. And you can put the dots together that Connelly is Kate's ex, the woman from the ice arena who's part of the mines. But we also connect the dots, and she repeats it to him. He doesn't want to admit that, but it was when he was married that they had sex. And Danvers explains she was on a break from her husband. We hear his first name here, Jake. But Connelly is very much like Hank when he talks about the case. He wants to keep a lid on it. He doesn't want hysteria built. He doesn't want it to go sideways and put a bad look on the department. And he doesn't think Danvers can control that and keep that from happening, and basically threatens her if she doesn't. So she leaves and doesn't like this. Now, I'm going to pause on Danvers' story here, and we're going to jump into everything going on with Navarro, and then we'll jump back where they meet up with each other and decide to work together. Now, Navarro goes to meet with Rose, and she's like, do you see Travis often? And she says death didn't change him, only comes when he wants something, so explains why when she did see him, he led her to something, and it's a good way to explain their relationship in the past. We learn he went into the ice on his own accord because he was dying and wasn't going to let the leukemia take him. But he saw Rose first before this happened. And Navarro was actually the one who found his body. That's the connection of Rose to Navarro. And we'll see when Navarro asks her when she started seeing the dead, she's so interested because her sister has the same behavior in seeing their mother. But Rose is like, look, I know people are born with it, seeing the dead, but this is Ennis. Happens around here all the time. This goes back to what the delivery driver was saying. And she says, I think the world is getting old, and Ennis is where the fabric of all things is coming apart at the seams. So this alludes to the supernatural, alludes to, like I was saying, about almost looking at this like this is a purgatory. And she says the thing about the dead is some of them come and visit because they miss you, some come to tell you something, like we see here with Travis, and some of them just want to take you with them. And I think when we're talking about someone that want to take you with them, there's a revenge going on here with this dead version of Annie affecting whatever happened here at this research center. And that is one of the going theories I'm going with. But what's important is Navarro brings up again that her sister sees her dead mother, but this actually started outside of Ennis. This didn't start when she brought her to Ennis. So it's actually the worst place she could have brought her to, believe it or not. And that's where she says, don't confuse the spirit world with mental health issues. This is important too, because it's keeping that questioning going of how much of the supernatural or how much is this mental health issues, just like the corpsicle is, where how much of this is them seeing things, or is it just hypothermia happening and delusions happening? It's also interesting when Rose draws the spiral symbol on the car outside in the snow and says it's old, Missy, older than Ennis, older than the ice probably. So that's really interesting line, and how this symbol has really gone through as like a through line for the show of True Detective. But it's important to note too that Navarro had saw it years ago, she says, the symbol before, but she had saw that on Annie's dead body. Now, we'll see the fighting scene in the pub, the tension still between mine people, indigenous people, and it really is important to connect her meeting this character of Chuck, who is very hostile towards her, but he's the one who will recognize Clark from the photo, and that will lead to him knowing that Clark brought his cousin's trailer. This trailer is going to be the big break in the case here, and knowing that Clark bought this trailer to hide his relationship with Annie. Now, in these big reveals happening in Navarro's side of the story, I do like this nice moment with her and Javi, where he's talking about the dog, saying she thinks she's real tough, you come real close, she will snap at you, but deep down she is a softie. I like that she knows it too, is obviously talking about Navarro. It sums her up perfectly. But a big moment here too happens when Navarro's driving home, and she touches her mother's cross necklace and has this vision, a flashback to her mother losing it at some point, and she's protecting her little sister while it's happening. And her mother's pointing at something, having these visions we're talking about, is seeing the dead clearly. So you're wondering who she was seeing. Now let's jump to the end here where it all comes together and they're going to have to work together. This big break in the case also is that Danvers calls the tattoo artist who gave Clark the tattoo and said he cried when he got the tattoo. This will lead to her getting from the tattoo artist the original photo of him with the tattoo, but also he had brought to a studio the picture of Annie having the tattoo on her back. He got the tattoo to match it with her tattoo 4 days after she died. That's why he was crying. And Danvers is going to explain this all to Navarro and says that the DNA also matched with the tongue at the research center to Annie. So it's a I told you so moment for Navarro, because this is why she ran into Danvers' office to connect the dots on that, and Danvers wouldn't listen. So it's a big mess up. That's the flaw of Danvers' detective skills, is turning the blind eye and being so difficult to break that wall through, where Navarro can see it right away and smell what's going on, a better instinct naturally. And that's where you see Danvers like, well, it looks like your case is my case. But that's what I'm talking about, where the big line here is Navarro's like, listen, the Wheeler thing was, and she's like, shut up. And she's like, we did exactly what we need to do. And she's like, we're not doing that, because Danvers does not want to talk about it. This is whatever that Peter was alluding to and why she hates Navarro. So it's a nice little mystery there. Now I got another total dart throw for you. I did think it was interesting when Peter was watching the Get Down Tonight dance on TikTok. A lot of the choreography in that video was similar to the choreography of Travis when he was pointing Rose in the direction of the dead body. So maybe that wasn't some crazy ritual dance he was doing. Maybe it was literally him doing the Get Down Tonight dance mixed in there that he had seen somebody do from seeing that on their phone with the TikTok dance. And it connects because it connects when Leah explains that Danvers and her dad did this dance. It's again connecting in the town to Danvers, right? That purgatory feeling. So like I mentioned earlier, Navarro will use the trick she used and lessons learned from Danvers about asking the right questions, and she knows the how is the way to go here. With how did they keep this relationship a secret with Clark and Annie? They use the trailer. They find also in this trailer, besides all the witchcraft, and you clearly see a giant voodoo doll, and you see a little polar bear, by the way, so that's something to note as well. But they find Annie's phone there, and that was not with her body at her crime scene, which is very suspicious. And there's a spiral over the bed, and there's pictures of Annie, it seems, all over the wall. So it makes you wonder, in Clark going insane, and this all happening after Annie died, I think the voodoo stuff being there and all the crazy witchcraft stuff, that maybe he's either so upset about her dying, but the part that makes him go insane maybe is some guilt going on, and her phone being there, that maybe he inadvertently caused her death in some way, or knows something about the death that he can't live with. And we get another big reveal here that Peter finds in the corpsicle only 6 bodies. And remember, Lund is the 7th body at the hospital, so you know there's 8 men, 1's missing. They put together it's Clark's not there, and Navarro's like, he's alive, he's out there, really exciting stuff. And that, again, can change the thoughts about this being supernatural, where this figure we saw running in the research center, that could have totally just been Clark and he was still there. So it's really an amazing episode to me. I'm loving this. I have really no flaws with it. I think it's so fun to watch, and it's really well done. Again, great character work, great relationships building, and I said all the characters are flawed here, which I like. And the mystery is just kicking up. It's doing a good job at giving you questions, but giving you answers in a nice balance. And it's just fun detective work they're doing for you here. This is a fun case they're kind of showing you. And it was so clever to do the corpsicle, having it reveal things slowly. So I'm giving this a 9.7. I thought it was even better than Premiere, which I gave a 9.5. Let me know your thoughts down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I read every comment. Try to respond as many as I can. Hit that sub button so you don't miss one of my reviews of True Detective. And I'll see you next time.